Welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. Here's your host, Tom Bourne.
Hi, and welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. I'm your host, Tom Bourne, and with me today is the awesome Robert Allan. Robert, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. And yourself, Tom?
Fantastic. Robert, whereabouts are you located?
Currently located in Bunbury, Southwest WA. In my humble opinion, having traveled in almost everywhere in Australia, at least on the boundary of the coastline, probably one of the best spots in the country.
Why is that?
It's just so unique. I mean, there's so many beautiful places in Australia, but what's unique about Southwest WA in particular is just one, probably the isolation, and two, just the raw beauty and Mother Nature, particularly the weather patterns and the ocean.
Very good, very good. All right, Robert, I know a little bit about you because I have done a little bit of research. But for those who haven't heard of you yet, can you tell us a little bit about your professional journey?
Well, shortly after finishing an environmental science degree, I entered the construction world as an environmental advisor, particularly looking at, primarily looking after the construction environmental management plans. And so I started my career in that for a couple of years, and then quickly diversified into safety. Being in the construction game, I saw an opportunity for myself on numerous levels. I thought there were some good growth opportunities, some good remuneration opportunities, and also I felt it a bit exciting. Like there was quite a bit to do in that space, and I was looking at the other people that were doing it. Some good, some not so good, and everything in between. And I thought, I think I can give this a crack. And after talking to my boss at the time, we agreed that if I went and did the studies, I'd have a good chance at getting into that field, in which I did. So I've been in the construction industry for probably just over 12 years now, and in safety for over a decade now. And that journey has taken me on various construction projects, both private, government, mining related, all over the state. And then after working for various organizations about 3 years ago, I decided I wanted to get into the consulting game and start my own consulting business here in the Southwest WA. Primarily looking at small, medium-sized businesses that I could see struggle with safety, one from the compliance side of things, but also from putting it into practice. And so that's sort of my target area, those sort of businesses that maybe probably don't have a safety advisor or a safety professional role in the organization for good reason. Probably they don't need one, but some do have a safety role in the organization, and sometimes those people need a bit of assistance or maybe a bit of guidance and coaching. And then I've got a few clients where they do have a team of safety people and they need a bit of independent assistance, or I wouldn't say expert guidance, but a professional sort of person to come in and help them on their journey. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's a brief overview, I suppose.
Yeah. What's some of the places you've worked in and around? You said you've worked in and around pretty much the whole of the state. What's some of the places you have worked?
Oh, look, I started on a project down in Margaret River, and then it's funny, I kind of went as far south and then moved north. So Margaret River, Busselton, and then I went up to Port Hedland, Karratha, Onslow, out in the Wheat Belt, projects in Perth, then back to the southwest, where I've been based for the last 8 years or something like that. Although when clients have projects all over the state, and then I've got a few clients over east in Tasmania and things like that. So yeah, quite a variety and locations. And when you talk about WA and how isolated it is, and I talked about how raw it is. It's also very harsh because some of those places, it's pretty harsh working environments, and it's a credit to those people that go and do it. And there's a reason they're paid well, is because they're flying out for however length of time it is, working in 40 plus degree heat, not doing the best jobs in the world, not in terms of the type of work, but in terms of the physical labor, the heat, all the elements they're up against. It can make or break people. So it's an industry, it's an interesting industry, a challenging one, and one that, yeah, it's a credit to those that can actually sustain it.
Yeah. I the local council just down the road from me, I noticed the other day it got to about I think it was about 33 or 34 degrees, and they shut the council tip down. They said it's too hot for our people and stuff like that. I'm like, imagine if they did that in the Pilbara. Imagine if they shut things down if it got to about 35 degrees. There'd be no work going for 6 months a year at least, I'd suggest.
Oh, well and truly, and sometimes it's not even the temperature that gets you; it's the humidity. I remember working in the Pilbara, and you're in the aircon when you're in your camp, but then as soon as you get out, you just start sweating before you even think about doing anything, and then yeah, it's just that constant cycle of aircon out in the field, sweat, back in the aircon, and it's actually not good for you doing that. But when you're working in an office and then out in the field as well, like, it's unavoidable. But yeah, and then you got the whole climatization, takes a couple of weeks, and then if you're in and out, that throws you off. So yeah, it's challenging, and dealing with those elements, it's just another risk that businesses have to manage, and that's a challenge in itself.
Yeah. You did some, as you said, you've done some work all around, plus things like Karratha, Port Hedland, Margaret River, Onslow. Onslow's a lovely place. Port Hedland, I have a reason for asking you this. So, all right, for those who don't know anything about Port Hedland, can you give a brief description of, I don't know, the town, what it is, what the importance of Port Hedland is, I guess, to the economy, etc., anything like that?
Oh, look, I wasn't in the mining sector when I was working up there. I was actually on a construction project for Water Corp. Was a client doing a wastewater treatment plant and pump station and pipeline and that. But yeah, the mining industry all through that area is massive. And Port Hedland, that the name sort of alludes to what it is, but there's the massive mining port there, for iron ore, I'm assuming. And the town is interesting. I was actually at a camp in South Hedland, which the camp itself was actually really nice. It's probably one of the nicest camps I've been at. It kind of felt like you're staying in a hotel. So that was actually quite nice. And they had a sports center down the road, which is actually quite nice as well. There's some rough elements in South Hedland, which there's more to it than that. But there's obviously issues in Australia in terms of the Aboriginals and the situation they're in, which is different subject really. But Port Hedland itself, it's actually a beautiful area. But when you start talking about the Pilbara and the the wet and the dry season, it's a very harsh environment. But like a lot of those sort of mining towns, there's a lot going on. It's a bustling place in terms of mining and construction activities. And yeah, like you're so busy working when you're up there, you don't really have time to submerge yourself in the community or the surrounding environment, really, because I was up there for 3 weeks, and then you get 1 week off, and then you might go down to a local pub somewhere on the beach and have fish and chips, and come back, and that's your day. So
yeah, I lived in Port Hedland, South Hedland in particular, there for I don't know, about a year. It's funny, and most people who have been there usually describe it in either 3 or 2 words. The last word is being whole, and you can put in whatever 2 words you want in front, but it's not usually complimentary, which is astounding for the amount of money that actually flows through and out of that port every single day. Yeah, all right.
Well, I actually went through Port Hedland a few months ago for the first time in, I don't know, 10 years or something like that. And I thought the place actually looked a lot better than when I was there in terms of the council or shire putting some, funding into the community infrastructure and stuff like that. Like it looked like there's a bit of a swing in terms of trying to like revitalize it. And it was funny going from South Hedland. The project I went to after that was in Karratha, and my assumption going to Karratha, not having ever been there before, was that it was just going to be another sort of South Hedland, Port Hedland, and it was actually a really nice community. And I was like, wow, there's like nice houses and nice buildings and restaurants and cafes, and it was a totally different feel. It was for being so similar in terms of locality and industry. It was worlds apart, which was very, very interesting. But it was very well received on my behalf, being my next placement.
Yeah. My wife often said that if we'd been positioned in Karratha, we still probably would be in the Pilbara region, because you're right. Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. It is such a nicer town. There's modern facilities, there's classy dining, there's even cocktail bars. I mean, this is in the Pilbara. It's
and then
I like the place.
and there's a lot of families there, and you can tell that going there. And some people they love it, and like you say, once they go, they stay. And there's a lot of people that love the ocean, so they've got their boats and they do their fishing, and there's national parks within close range, so they can go do their camping, exploring, and there's a lot of adventures to be had up in that area. But you just got to be prepared for the wet season, I suppose, and the dry season and everything in between. So you're up against the elements, that's for sure.
All right, good. All right. Must be honest, I don't know much about environmental anything. So what does an environmental advisor do?
Well, it's probably much like safety in a sense, or even quality, right? So it's an area in which needs to be managed. So depending on where you are and what's going on, environmental advisor, for example, you'd be looking at things like, if you're working near a national park or something like that, you'd obviously be trying to preserve the national park and not having any impacts on that. So some of the things might be, preventing the introduction of weeds and seeds and bacteria, fungi, and that's. You've also got wildlife. You have to be concerned about. You've got, in some areas they're water catchment areas, and there might be dams that are drinking water, things like that. So you're going to be having to think about your groundwater management if you're doing excavations, erosion, sediment getting into the water. It's quite varied. Different areas you'll potentially have acid sulfate soils. You might be working in contaminated sites. So it's different to safety, in the sense that there's something there that you need to protect, and you need to have a management plan in place and risk assess it and actually implement it, monitor and review. So it's instead of the people, it's the environment, really, is what it comes down to.
Yeah. I must say that maybe 20 years ago, I was fairly cynical about the the combination of safety and environment being put together. Used to have people who, used to see people who left university with an environmental degree come out and be safety and environment officers on mine sites, and I'd be like, yeah, I don't see the connection. Protecting people, protecting snakes, I don't see the connection. But I've become a bit wiser since then, because I don't know, the environment affects all of us in the end, doesn't it?
Yeah, but look, you're quite right. I think, if you go back to my journey and I started as an environmental advisor, I was seeing people in the safety positions, classes, HSE advisors with no environmental qualifications, although it is an interesting one, and there is some crossover. So inherently through safety, if you look at chemicals, you're inherently already got that environmental aspect. You've got the handling of chemicals or the use of chemicals by people, which you obviously you don't want to impact the people using them, but at the same time you don't want to impact the environment. So you kind of got inherently some environmental aspects there. And to be honest, there's a lot of low level or easily to manage environmental aspects and impacts that safety professionals can manage quite easily, right? And then even as an environmentalist, to be honest, like I was a generalist, I was no specialist in any aspects particularly. But when it comes to more in-depth environmental analysis and management, typically you'd get, a professional specialized in that area or a consultancy to come in and tell you how to manage it. Anyway, some of that stuff's easy enough for a safety professional. Some of it's not. And it really depends on where you're working and what you're doing, to be honest. But yeah, it is interesting. I don't think you should throw an E on somebody's title or safety unless they're actually qualified, and much like quality. So I tend to agree with you, although in a lot of these aspects there is some crossover, and with the right training and experience, you can quite easily be somewhat competent in these areas, and that's where safety, environment, and quality, that they can quite easily be integrated. I mean, if you look at the management systems and the way that the ISO standards are set up, I mean, quality ISO 9001 really is the umbrella standard for management systems. And all the other ones sort of just are substandard per se. And really, you look at the high level clauses, they're all the same. Obviously, the context changes, but that's the important bit, is that the context does change, but the management systems are all set up the same, structured the same. So, you can. I suppose that sort of ties into my journey as well. That's how I continue to diversify from environment to safety, and then quality as well, and seeing how they're really all the same. You're just looking at different contexts of managing the business, really.
Good. Quite a bit of environmental legislation has been introduced across most modern countries in the last 20 years. Would you say that environment and health and safety are largely compliance functions these days, or is there more of an ethical or moral part to that as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting in itself. Like if you look at miners and construction companies looking at trying to start a project, there is a lot of red tape in terms of environmental approvals. Whether that's justified or not, I would assume to a degree it would be, or else it wouldn't be there. I don't know the ins and outs of all that bureaucratic stuff and how they got to that point, because it's been in the pipeline for years. And to be honest, I don't really get stuck in that space too much. But I do know it is a pain for miners and contractors trying to get going with projects that are already approved, and they're just waiting for certain approvals, especially being that they're government organizations that do the approvals, and they can take quite a long time, especially if they get a backlog of approvals sitting on their desks. So that is a pain point for many organizations. Now, in terms of managing safety environment, in terms of it being compliance based, yes, I mean, there's many factors on why you do safety. Like if you just talk about safety, there's a lot of reasons why you do it. One, from an ethical and moral point of view, you're going to want to look after your people, right? Like that's just humans. Most humans care for one another, and they don't want, you know, any harm to occur on their people. But then the other aspect is you've got compliance. So, you know, you've got the acts and the regs and the whole legislative framework that you need to comply with. So that's a component. And then you've got other external factors. You might have board expectations. You know, you're going to have client requirements and expectations. So there's a lot of requirements, you know, both internally and externally that organizations need to comply with. Now the tricky bit is actually making sure what you're doing on the ground is beneficial. In a safety role, it's also, or a safety environmental role, whatever role that is, you know, if the majority of your time is doing compliance activities, you know, paper-based type compliance activities, and you're not actually looking at what's going on the ground, you know, you're gonna have a balance where it's not balanced, basically. You know, because you need to work out where that balance needs to be for your organization, and that really differs on the organization and type of activities they're undertaking. So, and that's one of the struggles with managing it, is that you can't over prescribe on how to do it because every organization is so different and unique. The challenge is determining how much time you dedicate to each. And then the other tricky bit is, if you do things because you legally have to, or it's a client requirement, you know, you do that. But if it's something above and beyond, or you're trying to meet a legal requirement that's not overly prescriptive, the challenge there is determining what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and how you're going to ensure that it's actually beneficial and fit for purpose. That's one of the things that commonly sort of help organizations with, is trying to find that balance.
Yeah.
That's the bit I actually really enjoy. And sometimes it takes a while to actually strike a balance and work out, you know, what's fit for purpose, what's practical, what actually provides benefit. Sometimes that's trial and error. Sometimes, you know, you can strike that balance pretty easily. But sometimes it does take a lot of thought and review. And sometimes you just keep going around in circles till eventually you get back to the starting point where you first started and you thought, all right, well, let's just keep doing what we were doing, eh?
All right. In the last probably 10, 15 years, there's been a lot of talk about behavioural-based safety, safety 1, safety 2, new view safety. It's like going into an ice cream shop. You've got a million different flavours of this thing that's called safety. Is there some sort of philosophy that actually guides you in terms of your practice of safety?
Not particularly any one. It's funny. There's actually there's a post on LinkedIn about this not too long ago, and I actually provided a comment, something like, new view, old view, sideways view, upside down view, doesn't really matter as long as you're doing something to try to continuously improve. And then, you know, I took a quote from somewhere, I can't actually quite remember, but It said if you're not evolving, you're revolving. Look, I think all of those theories and methods, there's probably some good points in there, but like anything, in business or in life in general, everyone's got an opinion, right? There's a lot of research that goes on, and there's a lot of science behind a lot of stuff. Really, what you got to do is you've got to collate all that information, analyze it, and make your own decision. Really, so to me, a lot of that stuff are good resources for doing that. In terms of sticking to one and that being the answer, the theory or approach that you're going to take, to me, you'd be doing an injustice to yourself and your organization, because there's so much out there, and there's so much thinking and research that goes on to this, that it's continuously evolving, that you have to be agile. You got to keep up with the times. Another one, another quote I heard that I quite like is that, if you're doing what you're doing 10 years ago, you're either 10 years behind, or 10 years ago, you're 10 years ahead of time. So in some instances, that's perfectly fine. Things you're doing previously might be perfectly okay, but a lot of times there is opportunities for improvement. There is new ways to do things. We learn new things about safety every day. I mean, if you look at what's happening with Safe Work Australia and all the work safes, there's constantly new codes of practice coming out, new exposure standards, banning engineered stone. So we're always learning, and until you learn, or until you actually know of something, how can you manage it in that way? Because you don't know any different. So yeah, to me, you really just got to keep your finger on the pulse and see what's going on out there, and always be open to new ideas and opportunities to improve. And doesn't mean you have to utilize it, but you can think about it in your own practice and go, all right, well, that's interesting. How can we apply that here? And maybe you can't, maybe you can, but sometimes it's just that the way you think might even just help you with your own practice on, next time I might approach the situation a bit differently, So no clear answer on that one. Sorry, Tom.
That's all right. That's all right. All right. Organizational maturity. How do you determine if an organization has a mature safety program or not? I'm curious.
Well, there's people out there that do it probably far better than I do. There's a lot of research, and there's a lot of programs out there that are pretty well defined in terms of trying to measure that. To me, an organization sort of needs to define their own measurements on how they would sort of classify themselves in terms of safety culture or safety maturity or safety climate, or however you want to define it. But there is a big difference in terms of doing nothing or doing the bare minimum, to going above and beyond, and that includes really caring for your people, or being really innovative, really engaging in your teams, and then you've got everything in between. So I mean, depending on the type of business it is, you might be okay sitting right in the middle, where you meet your requirements, and you might have some good practices in place on the ground. That might be quite fine. But for some businesses, especially if you want to be a sort of mid top tier construction company, or if you want to work for the mining companies, etc., they're looking for mature safety systems. And a good way to assess that, in my opinion, I mean, one part of that is, how does it stack up against a standard such as ISO 45001? Now, I'm not saying that's the answer, but it is a good indication of, does somebody have a good and robust management system? The other aspect of that is, how effective is it on the ground, and what are the opinions of the people, and what sort of hazards, near misses, and incidents are coming through. And from all that information plus more, you could probably get a good indication of where your organization sits in terms of safety, culture, maturity, climate, however you want to classify. And even that, when you start looking at those terms, those are debated. Some people think it's a load of BS. There's no such thing as safety culture. And, they're probably quite right. And I kind of tend to agree. Like, yeah, maybe it is just organizational culture, because to be honest, safety, it is just part of managing business, right? Like, to separate safety and say that safety is a thing, it's not really a thing. It's just helping you, it's looking after your people. It's managing your business, making sure that nothing bad happens. So, I quite agree with that in many ways. But for some organizations, if they really want to focus in on one area like safety, if they want to have an assessment undertaken or do some evaluation to get an understanding of, all right, where do we sit with safety? What's the culture? What are the thoughts of our people? How do our management systems stack up and, on paper and in practice? It might provide some benefit to them. It's probably the ones like the zero harm, where, those sort of slogans and that, as that gets bashed a lot in the safety realm. And for good reason or not. But, there is arguments that, look, if you think it provides you benefit, if you've already have it, I mean, sometimes it's hard to just erase it. Yeah, zero harm, it's, in most instances, it's not practical, right? Or it's not achievable. There's really no such thing as zero harm. Something's always going to happen somewhere. Yes, you want to avoid it. It's probably more of a, I don't know if you'd call it a vision, but it definitely shouldn't be a goal, because it'd be unrealistic. But, I think some of that stuff, the shift maybe might be looking at preventing fatalities and life-altering injuries and illnesses, maybe. Although that's long-winded. So maybe that's what they mean by zero harm in some instances, is that, maybe they're quite accepting that there'll be, some first aid injuries, there might be some medical treatment injuries here and there. But, for some of them, that might be what they're talking about. And without knowing, a lot of times it's about the intent rather than the statement.
Yeah. I don't think, I mean, you're right, it does get poo-pooed quite rightly in safety circles. But perhaps it shouldn't just be thrown out, simply because if you take it as an aspiration or a value, but not a goal, not a KPI, not a target, any of that, if we separate that apart, it's a great aspiration. That's what we would like to have. We would like to have world peace.
Correct. And I don't think there's anything wrong with the statement per se. I mean, mind you, sometimes people are against or these sort of things for their own personal benefit. That there might be some good validity around it too. If you look at Sydney Decker, for example, I know, well, last I heard him speak, he was very against the zero harm, but he had some pretty classic real life examples of focusing on the wrong items of safety, which I totally understand. I think that's fantastic, and that's where a lot of time we do spend too much effort on low level safety risk, for example. And when we talk about compliance and things like that, we're starting to go back to what we were talking about before. If a safety officer is, strictly doing compliance-based activities, which aren't out in the field looking at high-risk construction activities or high-risk activities in general, the time spent may not be the time spent on the right area. And then, so if you go back to to zero harm in that. Yeah, it gets a bad rap. I wouldn't necessarily encourage an organization to utilize that terminology. And I don't like slogans and mottos and things like that. But if organizations think that that's what they need, and there's a reason behind it, as long as it gets the right communications, the intent is clear, and it provides some benefit, then I don't think it should inhibit anyone from utilizing that sort of terminology.
All right. Talk to me. What is Lobos Advisory? What does it do?
Lobos Advisory, we sort of try to focus on like 3 areas, and it's very generalized in that respect. One's safety consulting, being that safety is very complex and there's many aspects of safety. Put that in simple terms, it's safety consulting. So everything from strategy development of WHS management systems, all the way down to helping manage safety on the front line. And then the other sort of service stream is ISO certification. So on the safety, environment, and quality areas, where we help organizations that not always trying to achieve certification, but sometimes they might just want a management system sort of aligned to those certificate or to those standards. So yeah, help clients in that area. And then the third sort of service stream is safety training / coaching. So helping organizations, if they got a team managing safety or work that's obviously got some safety elements, there's various, gaps in knowledge. So it just depends on what that is. That it might be, providing a training on, safety fundamentals, safety principles, the basics of how to manage safety through to, the other aspect will be coaching, where, if there's a young green safety officer advisor, it'd be providing some coaching / mentorship. So not only on the particulars of risk management, but just also on the approach as well. So it's just giving them some guidance to feel confident in the role and make sure that you lead them in the right direction, where they're not coming in as a safety officer where they're writing up tickets and they've got their baton and they're catching people out. But it's more of that, let's increase the educational awareness, let's improve how we manage safety, let's build some relationships with the people on the ground, and let's get their inputs and views, and considering the legislative compliance requirements, clients requirements, internal requirements. Let's factor that in. Let's factor what actually happens on the front line, and let's look at what our procedures say versus what we do, and let's work out where the gap is or non-compliance, and determine what do we need to do to continue forward in the best approach, one for the people doing the work, but also the organization.
Excellent. Robert Allan, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. But for now, we'll have to leave it there.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Health and Safety Conversations with Tom Bourne. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy the rest of your week.